For the keynote, we have Aurynn from Eiara. She's the founder of Eiara and a DevOps culturalist, and she'll give us a great discussion about DevOps and how to build a team. So, thank you.
Good morning. Am I on? Yes, you can all hear me. Cool. Now we will wait for AV and see if it works properly, because it's a conference. It wouldn't be a conference without AV not working. And no, almost. I can see myself here, but we're not on screen yet. Yeah, all right, cool. AV success stories. Congrats to the AV, or many thanks to the AV team. I know this stuff is super duper hard, so many thanks to the AV team. Cool. Hi, I'm Aurynn. It is really an honor to speak here in front of all of you today. You may have heard me speak previously about tech culture and the way that our cultures frame everything that we do. As mentioned, I am founder and principal DevOps culturalist at Eiara Limited, and we're a DevOps consultancy based out of Wellington, and one of the core things that we work on is ensuring the success of technological changes by focusing on the cultural and organizational needs around those changes. And really, it was a great day yesterday, wasn't it? That keynote was so good, and I took so much away from it. I was really excited by everything I could get out of it, and I really hope it was as valuable for you too. Words are hard. It's first thing in the morning. And this morning, I want to talk to you about, well, how to do DevOps, because this is an easy and non-confrontational topic, right? And it would be actually really easy to approach this as a technical talk. Build on all of those great presentations from yesterday. Talk about deployment engineering, or migrating to microservices, or getting containerization into your stack, or I could talk about my layer theory of DevOps and how that impacts designing production systems. Or talk about global transactions and how to think about what microservices mean in the context of a global transaction and what data integrity can mean in these sorts of environments. And these are all really important architectural questions. These are very important parts of our technical conversations, but these are, well, they're technical conversations. And, well, who's had that thing? Who's had that thing where they thought a new technology was the bee's knees, that it was gonna set the world on fire, and there was just no traction. You just couldn't get this new technology, this thing that you knew would solve so many problems, into where you worked. Well, I've definitely run into this. I've tried to get Postgres into production and failed. I've tried to get SaltStack, which I'm quite a fan of, into production and failed. I've tried to get Docker into production and failed, or even just like basic things like the cloud, AWS or Azure, into production and failed. And I bet almost all of you have a very similar story. And we rationalize this in a variety of ways. We talk about how people just won't listen. We use negative epithets to describe others. We use hostile and dismissive language to respond to people who don't agree with us. Come on, do the thing. There we go. We treat users like this, our peers, our managers, the other people that we work with. And I want to be clear, this isn't a blame session, but this is cultural. It's what we were taught to do. So it is what we do. What we feel, the thing that drives this is often frustration. I get frustrated at this. I get irritated and sometimes angry about this thing that I know will work, will help. It's just being ignored. But as I mentioned, I run Eiara, and as a consultant, I get to see a lot of companies in action and get to see a lot of how internal cultures have formed and operate. So today, instead of talking to you about all of this amazingly cool technology and technically cool things that we can do, I'd like to talk to you about change and about how to reason about change and how to create lasting change in your organizations. But before I start, it is really important to set some context here. my thoughts and ideas are grounded in my cultural theory of contempt culture. And you can Google this, it'll come up really quickly. And this is the process by which tech culture uses contemptuous behavior as like our way of expressing and generating our social capital. And my experiences as a developer and in speaking to business are all kind of built on this theory. And so, with that, this morning, I'd actually like to talk to you about the things that I have learned by talking to your boss, or why change is very hard and what to do about it. And as I mentioned, contempt culture is, as technical people, our communications culture, and it has been for a very, very long time. From the 1970s and the genesis of the word loser, which came out of MIT, or the 80s with problem exists between chair and keyboard, or the ID10T error, or the very first of the BOFH stories, or the 90s and Eternal September, the birth of PHP, and subsequently the birth of hating PHP, the 2000s and the birth of Rails and the birth of hating Rails devs, the 2010s, the birth of Node, the birth of hating people who use Node, hating people who use JavaScript. More recently, front-end devs, and the way we treat front-end devs so badly, like as a discipline, we treat them so badly. Our cultures are epitomized by people like Linus Torvalds and his utterly toxic cult of personality with this pervasive and nonsensical belief that technical skill is all that matters. And this isn't me throwing stones at a culture that I am not a part of. I was and remain a part of this culture. I can tell this story of that one time I was at a meetup, and this was like 100 people in this big multi-level bar. And it was dead quiet. It's that part of the meetup where people are like announcing jobs. And I shouted, "Get a real language," out into the quiet of the darkness. I did that. And I still feel gross about that a decade later. Or the number of times that I implied that anyone who uses PHP is clearly an incompetent and incapable developer, and like going beyond implication, like flat out saying it. And I still to this day struggle to define or to describe things in terms of why it's dangerous or where the pitfalls will lie, instead of using hostile and contemptuous language. And I'm bringing all of this up not to make us feel bad. I'm not here to throw blame. Instead, I'm bringing this up because having an idea of the system we are participating in helps us understand the behaviors that we're seeing. And without a framework to examine this system, we cannot understand the system. Excuse me. But with a framework, we can look at what people are doing and why, and to try to draw hypotheses. And these are hypotheses that try to examine and internalize and understand the worldview and positioning of others. And these are hypotheses that aren't, like what we normally do, be directly insulting to other people's worldviews. And because all of our communications are primed to be unpleasant, like deeply unpleasant to others, we need a new framework. We need new ways to ask new questions. New questions like, what has pervasive hostility done to our contexts when we're at our jobs? What is it still doing when we're at our jobs? And these are important questions because all of this technology, microservices and Docker and CI and the hybrid cloud, which I'm hearing so much about now, and any latest new hotness that you could pick, these things exist only in a business context. So we need to talk about what the business cares about. And, well, this is kind of a hard one, I know. The business does not care about technology. Flat out at all. And I know. Technology matters to us. Technology is so cool. It's so cool. And I got into this whole DevOps thing because I was writing because I was writing web software. And I got asked by a sysadmin when I went to deploy this software, and they sighed at me, and I did deserve this sigh at the time. And they said, could you please write a Puppet manifest so we can deploy this? And I said, what is this new thing? And Puppet, got into Puppet. I thought, this is so cool. I never, ever touched a tool like this. That is not the button I wanted. See, AV is hard and giving presentations is hard. So don't do it. It's great fun. You'll never enjoy it. But I love distributed programming, right? And considering orchestration and how a system behaves across disparate and interconnected parts like this that I can now reason about with Puppet was fascinating. This was new and interesting in a way I could never conceive of before. I started to consider programming as not my programming, but as part of this larger, intricate whole. And this led to new questions like, how does this impose costs and dependencies? How does this add new load to the system? How does this behave in a broader context? What, crucially, did I miss? What new things do I need to think about? So yeah, I'm with you. Technology is cool. I love this whole Lambda functions as a service world. I love Terraform. And this being able to reason about my entire infrastructure through a single tool. I've done terrible things with Terraform. You should look them up. We can be sad about it together. I hold SaltStack dearly, dearly in my heart, even as we migrate away from configuration management to this very wonderful containerized world. But what I think is cool, what you think is cool, this does not matter to the business. The business cares about outcomes. Outcomes like, how does this affect our ability to keep the lights on? How does this affect our ability to find new customers? How does this affect our ability to make payroll? Y'all like getting paid. I like paying my rent too. How does this affect that? And the myriad of other things that go into making a business continue to run. So, coming back to it, who's had that experience where we know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that a new technology will save a business so much money, possibly heaps of money, will reduce workloads, will in that light of what a business truly cares about, outcomes, improve them, improve those outcomes. And yet, we're ignored. We're ignored when we try to pitch this technology, unable to get people to listen to what we think will help. What's happening in this case is that the business is focusing on predictability. The existing process is known. It can be planned for, budgeted, reasoned about. And this is what matters. So when we talk about new technologies, we're not asking just for the time and the cost of that time, the prices of exploration and potential failure. We're asking for the business to abandon knowability, asking for the business to abandon that ability to predict and plan and budget. And that is a risk. And more than anything else, risk is what businesses care about. And if we think about this as part of that broader system, as part of our history under contempt culture, we can see that a communications gap has been created. And this, again, this is a really hard one, and that gap is not the business's fault. Think about what I've said earlier about all of the ways pasts affect present, and this is one of those ways. We stand on the shoulders of mistakes and hostility and misguidance, of harmful behavior, of being taught to express ourselves in contemptuous terms, and as a result, we are not trusted. We are sidelined. We exist fully to be worked around, and which, anyone who works in InfoSec could tell you so many stories about, but I digress. And you will have seen this in action. When we build tools and we say they are for ourselves, they're good enough for us, but those tools encode hostility, encode contempt. Like, how long has it taken to get good open source development toolchains onto Windows? Well, it turns out it took Microsoft stepping up to do it for the community, because the community holds Windows in so much contempt that they would never bother doing it. They held users, people who used Windows, people that they wanted to be on that let's get them into free software and open source path. They held them in such contempt just because they used a tool. You've seen this with the defensive attitudes that people have, either when you've gone to speak to them or they've come to speak to you, where we've pushed this strong cultural idea of thou shalt come to me and thy knowledge is worthless in the face of my towering might of computer facts. Where we've styled ourselves in these terms of elitism, like wizard or ninja or rock star, or, and this is my personal favorite, this new one, the 10x engineer. And by doing this, we've pushed ourselves to the sidelines. This, naturally, is not super great when we want to, talk about these new technologies that we think will save time or money. Or, when something's happened and now we need to deal with some unrealistic requests that have come through. But as I said, this is not the business's fault. This is our fault. We've done this to ourselves. And you may not have been engaged in these behaviors. You may not have done things yourself. But that doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter. And I wish it did, but it doesn't matter. Because you benefit and suffer from the actions of people like you. Actions in a history that goes back decades. A history that has these ramifications to this day. And those ramifications, those histories, affect everything that we are even able to do today. Everything that we will be able to do tomorrow. And to touch on some of those consequences, I'd like to bring up an article that I read on the Intelligencer the other day, and I can find a link for you later. Hit me up. And this article was an interview with the founder of Delicious. Who remembers Delicious, the link aggregator site thing that predated Reddit, I believe. And this was after they had gotten acquired by Yahoo. And the specific line that I remember from the article was, if you wanted to get hardware, you went to the hardware request committee with your proposal. They assumed that engineers liked spending money for no reason. So you'd have to go back and present again in 2 weeks. So there's a month gone. And that sounds pretty terrible, doesn't it? So let's look at the process here. There's a process for getting hardware. Why is that process in place? Well, let's look at the framing that we're given. The framing that we're given says that engineers like spending money for no reason. Okay, so why would the business believe that? Why would the business have created a process that believes that? Because, and this is really important, it's not arbitrary. This belief exists as a consequence, a result of past actions that were, in the eyes of the business, risky, unnecessary, too costly. It didn't matter at all that the founder of Delicious came after this process was created. He never engaged in this action that resulted in the business reacting this way. He didn't try to buy unnecessary hardware or do risky things. Come on, do the thing. That history still affected him. It still affected his team, his ability to do his job. And as engineers, you've all heard this story just now, and we care about technology, right? We care a lot about technology, and we presume that it was necessary to buy this hardware, and this was an unnecessary process. So if we think it's necessary, and they don't, then once again, we're back to that communications gap. And this is on us. We are not communicating effectively. We are not telling them why it's necessary, why it's risky not to have this new technology, what benefits that it's offering. And so when engineers bought stuff, maybe it didn't work out. Maybe an accountant looked at a graph of unnecessary expenditures, spend that wasn't justified. Someone's bonus possibly was tied to saving money. And we end up with this process, a process that does not believe engineering, a process that demands a month to ensure that money is not being wasted. And the future the future of people who are disconnected from those actions has to bear those consequences. And that we think this is harmful, that we think this is a bad process. Well, we're operating under different assumptions than the people who made this process. They're not better assumptions, they're just different assumptions. And in order to communicate to the business why this is risky, why these consequences make it difficult to address risks, why this process is not solving the problem that it is intended to solve, we cannot speak the language of technology. We cannot speak our language. We cannot treat our assumptions as inherently better. We have to speak to the business on the business's terms. And for decades, our culture has told us that we don't have to. It's told us to consider that people without technical knowledge are lesser than us, are worse than us, or they're ignorant. They are less valuable to the organization than we are. And as a culture, consequence of our culture telling us to treat people like that, we do. We do this. We treat them with contempt and hostility, and they're used to it from us. They're used to, then we covered that with defensiveness a moment ago, which means overall that they're primed to not listen. They're primed to ignore us. And to make a change, well, to make any sort of change, someone has to listen. Change doesn't magically spring out of thin air. Unlike geese, change does not grow on trees. And this is important. This is really, really important because if we want to enact change, we need to know that the business does actually care about technology. And you might be thinking, wait, Aurynn, you've just spent like this entire first act telling us that technology doesn't matter to the business. And yes, I did. And I was telling the truth. The business doesn't care. But it also does care a lot about the technology that is currently being used and the implications of that technology that is currently being used. Businesses, people in businesses, don't care about technology like we do. We care about the new shiny hotness, Terraform or Docker, take your pick. But they do care about knowability, as I've touched on before. They care about having believable estimates, that existing technology choices are knowable, that there are established processes, existing known defined boundaries, like the process I mentioned that believes that engineers just want to buy unnecessary hardware. And these processes and status quo, just like this one, arise from experiences that the business has had. Attempts to answer that question of, how do we not think about this again? Or how do we not have that failure happen again? Or, so businesses do care about technology in the sense of, great, yes, we've solved that problem, good job team, hooray. Or in the language of our wonderful lightning talk yesterday, and there was much rejoicing. But this isn't the end of the story. This ends in consequences. Consequences like change management controls that result in weeks or even months to deploy changes. Going through a process that we look at and go, why? Gentle, sad noises, and there was no rejoicing. And it's often because of anxiety. It's because a deploy failed, perhaps catastrophically, and it might have been days or weeks, months in some cases, to manage a rollback or a roll forward. Weeks where the business was losing money, where something critical wasn't working properly. Or it might be reacting to legislation and compliance and regulatory needs, or the news cycle, or any number of things. But this is the risk that they care about. Then that is where technology truly matters to the business. That's where they care the most. Not out of newness or shininess, but in stability and knowability and observable outcomes. And some of these triggering events may not have happened at the business they've been implemented in. It might have happened years ago, at previous employers. And those people brought their experiences with them. Because people cannot be disconnected from their pasts or from their experiences in their pasts. And a new employer is only partly a clean slate. We will come to a new employer and adopt new practices, but we'll also bring our old anxieties and our own old frameworks, passively, implicitly start to re-implement them. And this has those consequences. Consequences like, well, we all know about knowledge hoarders, the people who know how the technical system works, why it is the way it is, what to do when it fails. Excuse me. These people are in the critical path. They are enabled and encouraged by this approach to risk management. And these people are often hostile. They're very defensive of their knowledge, of their place in the organization. And this hostility and toxicity is encouraged and enabled by this approach to risk management. And I mean, that's not great. I've worked with people like that. I've been people like that. And I hated it. When I worked with them, I was made to feel ignorant and useless. And this is a difficult feeling. It generates a lot of feelings for me of imposter syndrome. It reinforces my inadequacies. It's difficult to stand up in front of all of you and speak about anything. And I still bear those marks years later. And these people become impediments to change, especially major changes, especially really, really major changes. Like that biggest one since the birth of the World Wide Web. You all know what I'm talking about, of course. It's the cloud. A cloud is a fascinating part of the DevOps story, isn't it? In many ways, many ways, the cloud is what enabled DevOps to even happen on a technical level, where we could first, finally, truly experiment and test and refine, all without needing to go through those bureaucratic and resistant processes that we've already covered. Like you plug in your credit card to Amazon and now you can start playing. I don't have to go and justify over a month that I need a new machine. Cloud is where infracode became real, where automation could blossom and grow far beyond what we ever had before. And cloud as we know it launched on May 14th, 2006. We had EC2 instances, we had S3, we had the real actual cloud to do real actual cloud things. As of today, as of right now, that was 12 years, 8 months, and 11 days ago. And earlier this year, in March, I was speaking in front of a group of senior tech executives in New Zealand. And I raised this point as well. At that point, it was 12 years and 9 days. Because the event I was speaking at was all about dipping our toes into possibly exploring the cloud and talking about hybrid clouds for the first time. And 12 years. It's been 12 years. And we were just starting to have those conversations. The value of the cloud, the things that it enables, this infracode and automation, those are not the questions that needed to be answered or addressed, because those questions don't matter. Those are the questions that we care about, that I care about, that hopefully you care about. Otherwise, that's a really awkward sentence. The technology that we care about, the business doesn't care. But we can spin up a new instance in like 30 seconds because we are bad at communicating how being able to spin up a new instance in 30 seconds impacts risk. What risks it alters or removes, what risks it creates, what it costs, not just in terms of runtime and operational expense, but in terms of training, migration, in terms of meeting regulatory needs, in terms of marketing and the news cycle. And these changes, asking for these changes, are deeply anxiety-inducing. Businesses want stability, and they want to manage risk, and they don't know how this change will manage or alter risk. So someone needs to communicate that. We need to communicate that. Sometimes though, we get really lucky. Sometimes change will start. Like this whole DevOps thing, we're having these conversations now. And it is a major change. And as I've touched on, change is a risk. But somehow the necessity for that change has become apparent. It's become harder to hire the talent needed to run these older systems. It's become where critical people are leaving because they're bored and they want to go play with new toys. Or the ideas are, as I've talked about from March this year, coming up at industry conventions, and they're starting to hear about them from their peers. Regardless of the trigger, it can and does happen, and then the change will begin. And who's been in that environment where the change has started, and then it stalled out, and it failed? I've been there, more than once, in fact. And it's part of a theme. And the theme is that when it's failing, it's a part of that communications gap. Why is this change valuable? What risks at a business level does it impact? And a question I haven't brought up before, but is really important, is how does this alter our power dynamic? And this question is really, really important, because the power dynamic, the people who can and will say no, they always dictate whether or not a change can happen. And I have a story about that from a client. And this is a big, staid, conservative organization. This is one with release cycles that get measured in months. And they wanted to roll Docker as part of their deployment process and get at least part of the deployment process operating in kind of this new containerized world. And they were running into issues with the release management, the person in charge who was there to make sure that releases didn't break anything. And it was mission critical that nothing went down. And so there was a process here. Fill out some forms, submit some builds, they get qualified, they fail qualification, you get them back, wait another 6 weeks, etc. And this is the sort of process that, results in everything in the kitchen sink getting added into a build to try to maximize on that time for the test cycle. And yes, that's really, really risky. I know that, and you know that. So they're trying to get Docker in to kind of start to address this and get a shorter release cycle and kind of work faster in this way. But the releases are owned by this manager, and this process that this manager is a part of still exists. They still have to report to someone, and they still have to explain why we're doing things, what's happened, why it broke, or why it didn't break. So what they did was they sat down with this manager and they said, okay, what are you concerned about? What matters to you? And when they weren't rude about it, and they weren't condescending, they were nice and respectful, and they cared about the responses, and they listened to those responsive, and they never, ever stopped the manager and said, no, you're wrong. Because no, you're wrong is a part of that condescension. It is framing our own assumptions and knowledge as superior or more important. And so they got this information, and they took it, and they went off and built a demo around that. They went back and they were like, okay, cool. Here's what we can do for you with our new process, with this whole Docker worldview and Git, Git flow and CI and all of these things. This is what we can give you. Here's what it provides. Does it meet your needs? And if not, what did we miss? And the release manager was like, wow, okay, cool. This gives me better and more accurate information than I currently have access to. I am on board with your fancy new magic tech thing. This is great, yay. And that is what we want to enable, right? That is what we're here for, is to make the lives of others better. And adding Docker here wasn't a technology decision. Technology wasn't even the driver or a core focus. The focus here was seeing if technology could solve a problem for someone and understanding that the rest of the business has different needs. And that Docker was the tool isn't the point of the story. The point of the story is understanding that a process existed and was being affected, that altering process in a business is a major act. And to understand that and understand how that impacts technology, we need to understand and talk about a key concept, namely that all technology is political. And I know there's a bunch of you who are now going to be saying, no, it's not. Actually, you're completely wrong, Aurynn. Technology and politics are completely disconnected. And I'm sorry, well, I'm not actually sorry, but you are wrong. You are fundamentally and completely wrong. Because, well, who's heard of Conway's Law? Let's talk about Conway's Law. If you haven't heard of Conway's Law, it says, organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of those organizations. And this one sentence tells us why technology is political. Because all technology encodes the organization that made it. That's all politics is, really. How we do stuff, how we talk to each other, our shared values. From this, we can look at technologies. We can look at any new technology, and we'll see one of two things. Either we'll see something that makes no sense. Why would anyone want to do things this way? Look, this is bad in all of these ways. No, really, this is terrible. Why would you do this? No, hold on, I need to go, because I'm gonna write a think piece on Medium about how much of a bad idea this is. And this is because the technology has politics that do not align with our own. It's the result of Conway's Law from an organization that has different values. It operates differently to the ones that we're familiar with. It has assumptions and axioms that are different from our own. Alternatively, we might see a technology that is so mind-blowingly correct, so immensely appropriate, that it's something that can solve all our problems. Such product, very complete, wow. And this is because that technology does have politics that align with our own. It is the result of Conway's Law from an organization that operates, not identically, but close enough. So we'll see one of those two worldviews when we look at a new technology. So what is a really, really good example of this in action? Well, we have one in the DevOps world, and that would be Docker. Docker is a great example of this. Who heard about Docker and thought, this is a terrible idea, why would anyone do this? Because I totally did. And then later decided that actually this was a really cool and great idea, because I totally did. I went through that process. I came up with my entire layer theory of DevOps as a result. And I didn't learn more about the technology to do that. I internalized this new set of political assumptions that matched those of the makers of Docker. That's why microservices isn't a technological pattern. This is not how to do technical things. This is a team organization pattern. It's trying to use the product of a Conway's Law that may be orthogonal to your organization and might result in a microlith, which is a terribly fun thing to have. Don't do that, it's a bad idea. Just keep it as a monolith, you'll be happier, please. And this is why, Conway's Law is why it has been 12 years and 8 months and 11 days since the cloud launched. And we're still talking about it, still, as it's some kind of new thing, because it's incompatible, politically incompatible with the considerations and axioms and the political landscape of those businesses. And this is all relevant because what we think we do is work on technology. But what we actually do, and what we should be doing, is understanding the political ramifications of technology and how that impacts the business that we work in. Without that understanding, without that consideration, we will continue to feel that frustration, continue to have difficult conversations, continue to feel resentful and struggle and just be like, argh, angry face all over. Such sad, very not great. So I've talked a lot about why we need to talk to businesses, and the assumptions that businesses are carrying when they come into these conversations that we're having with them, how what we're saying isn't working. But I haven't said anything about how to say different things, about new ways to think about how we engage with process and communicate the values and risks of benefits of these changes. And I can't give you specifics, like every organization is different, but I can talk to you about how I pitch DevOps to businesses, because DevOps isn't a technology, it's a process. It's never been about technology. It's a political artifact. Technology enabled it, but all technology is political, and it required that new worldview from us, the adopters. So when we talk about DevOps, when we bring it to our company, we need to talk about those changes. We need to learn the politics that we're bringing along. We need to learn to talk about those politics. And to talk about those politics, when I'm pitching DevOps to a business, one of the first things I'll ask, the very first things I'll ask is, I'll ask, what's the org chart? And they'll give me something that looks kind of like this. And then I'll go, cool, this is great, thank you. And then I'll ask, no, what does the real org chart look like? And there will be some confusion about what I mean here within the business, but the real org chart, the real power in an organization isn't who tells whom what to do, or even who says no, or can say no. It's not the influencers. It is the people who set the deadlines. That is the true power in an organization. And that's an important question to ask who owns the deadlines, because you cannot change process without the ability to try the new process. And that should be obvious, but what's not obvious, what is much less obvious, and something I've seen quite a lot, is that when things catch fire, and you can take whatever value of catch fire you like, the easiest path is to go back to the old process, the known process, the one that offers believable estimates, a process that could say, this will take a week to definitely fix, guaranteed, we've got stats going back years, 1 week. Or it's a month to definitely ship, we can hit that deadline. And I could come along and say, well, this new process might take an hour. And okay, might. Now I can't deal with might, I need to know now. I need certainty, not might, right now. And this isn't just outages or things being on fire, because this applies to shipping deadlines. This applies to crunch. This applies to any sort of getting a product to market. And without that space to explore and experiment, without being able to alter those deadlines, we can't change the politics. We can't offer those new processes. The second major thing I pitch at businesses is to get the tech team to stop being so insular. And we are really, really terrible about this, because we are burdened with history of being caustic and insulting and toxic to people who aren't us. But part of all of this DevOps change is we need to go and figure out everyone who will be affected by any of our proposed changes. We need to go and, as that story I told earlier from my client, ask them about their concerns and their needs. And we need to do it while understanding, while knowing that they will be defensive, that they will expect us to make their lives worse. And not just a little bit worse, a lot worse, a lot worse. And this is on us. We have to keep managing that. We have to be the ones who own that process, because they won't come to us. They have no reason to do so. The existing processes, they are supported by the existing processes that say work around us, bypass us. And I'd like to tell you a story I heard at KiwiCon a few years ago. This is not my story. This is the story of Etsy and how they were struggling with InfoSec within their company, and how they worked to get the InfoSec team into a place where they could be more effective. And the InfoSec team started off in the corner, as most tech teams do, very much that stereotype of hissing at the light at intruders, and this wasn't working for them. They were seeing a lot of security events that were very concerning, and events would happen and not get reported. And largely because people, if they reported something, would expect to get shouted at and belittled and told, well, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have clicked on that link, what's wrong with you? They expected to get crucified for doing it wrong. And this is clearly not sustainable. This doesn't work. And good InfoSec is a huge deal. So what Etsy did was they moved the InfoSec team out of its dark corner into the middle of the office, so that everyone had to walk by the InfoSec team to go anywhere else. They stopped hiring those caustic and abusive people. They put in a code of conduct that says, no, if you act like this, you're getting reported to HR and this is going on your file and you might get fired for it. And this was the really interesting part that I thought. They put it on a jar of lollies and they put it on a scale by their little pod. And they measured the number of security events that were getting reported and dealt with effectively against the weight of lollies in the jar. And what they noticed was that the number of events they were seeing decreased with the number of lollies in the jar over time, because people were passing by because they were in the critical path now, stopping to take some candy and just having a chat, asking for good practice, just getting that passive learning from the InfoSec team. Crucially, because the conversations were safe. People at Etsy had to be given a reason to interact with the InfoSec team. The InfoSec team had to change how they communicated, what they communicated, and why they were communicating it. In this case, lollies worked out really well. And by managing that relationship, by looking at Etsy's example, we need to learn that we need to manage those relationships ourselves across our businesses. We start that by being involved in the conversations where we need to be involved, where we can start to perform improvements, changes to the process, things that will make lives better, and dismantle those ideas that we exist only to make people's lives harder. And as I've touched on a lot, I keep touching on over and over again, we don't speak business very well, so we need to learn to do that. And this will be in financial terms. You'll need to talk to your boss or your boss's boss about the sort of financial information you will need to be able to provide. You'll need to be able to provide this in terms of risk and benefit, what they care about in the terms of risk, why things are getting said no to. That was a terrible sentence. What the benefits are. Why is this valuable to us? Why is this worth the considerable cost of a change? You need to understand their needs in their frame of reference and their context without the assumption that yours is better or more appropriate. This will require doing things like writing roadmaps, considering what's important today, what can wait, and why it can wait. You need to learn to ask questions like, what level of risk are you willing to adopt? And so this is one of the questions that will come up with me when I'm doing DR planning with a client. I'll say, how much data are you willing to lose? Is it a day, an hour, half an hour? And this tells us how much DR and automation that we need to deal with, what level of our backups need to be. I'll also ask things like, how long are you willing to be offline? And we'll get our number of nines out of that. Do businesses need 5 nines? Do they need 2? If they don't need 5 nines, why do we build to that? That's a lot of extra work. And as part of writing those roadmaps, you need to also, and I've been guilty of this too, but you need to think about that there is no perfect implementation. There is no such thing as perfect. There's just what meets our needs now. And focusing on the perfect, you'd think this would be obvious. It is the enemy of good. And I know we don't do this. I know we don't do this because one of the things I hear all the time is, oh, but we built this wrong, and if we had just done it right at the start, well, surprise, you couldn't. It wasn't possible. You could just do what you could do at the time, and how you could adapt that to what you need now. And maybe make it possible to change to what you might need in the future, but you don't know what you'll need in the future, I guarantee you. So if we please just get, if we'd done it right at the beginning, out of our vocabulary, that would be great, is a part of that caustic and toxic and hostile worldview. It belittles the efforts of those who came before you. It ignores the context and constraints of everything that they had to work under. I'll let you finish taking your photo. Cool. And the final thing I want to say this morning, and thank you all for your patience and time, is a lot of this, almost all of it in fact, leans on empathy, on recognizing and understanding and deeply internalizing that other people have different needs and goals and pressures, and that you need to participate in that. That is what DevOps is. initially being empathetic to other technical teams, meeting the needs of each other together. But DevOps isn't just technical teams. It cannot ever be just technical teams. We touch far too much for that. It has to be the whole organization. And we, you and I, all of us here as a part of DevOps are a part of making that change. We are, as a culture, growing in this direction. We all get to be a part of it, and that's really cool. And that, my dear friends, is all of the things, or some of them, I only have 45 minutes, that I've learned from talking to your boss. That we must listen and understand and empathize. That we must discard broken and internally inconsistent ideas like merit or done right. And by doing this, we can achieve new goals. And we can build a better future for everyone. Thank you.